Hello, everyone. My name is Verena, and I'm part of the Solid Earth team and also the person in charge of the Earth Building School. And just following on from my two previous live streams, this week we are going to look at creative options for natural plasters. So this is something that I am really passionate about. Like still after many years of building, natural building, and working with natural plasters. Every time I start a natural plaster project, I just get this rush of enthusiasm, and I hope that I can convey some of that today. So it is a little bit of a balancing act between not getting too technical and being more on the inspirational side. That's why I focus on the creative options in this live. Obviously, natural plasters, plastering in general, is a trade. It's a very long tradition. There's many traditions around the globe, and it is a topic which could be explored in depth for weeks, months, and even years. So, yeah, if you have contact with people that plaster for a living and who have really refined the craft, you see that they're like lifelong learners, and that there's just so many little rabbit holes and things that could be pursued here. So really just skimming the surface with this today, and my intention is to inspire you, to show you some of the options, what is possible, focusing on natural materials, so mainly earth and lime today. And yeah, opening up the conversation. So I'm sure there will be questions. If you have questions, I would like to invite you to pop them into the comments, and I will get to them at the end of the live stream. I have again prepared a presentation with images, and I will be concentrating on that and then circling back to your questions at the end. And if you're watching the replay, by all means, just pop in a question. In actual fact, if you're watching the replay either on Facebook or on YouTube, it would be really useful for me to receive questions, receive comments. You sharing, liking the channel, and so forth really helps me. And there's a lot of work that goes into these presentations, so I'm trying to make them worthwhile for you to watch. So show us some love, please, and help us reach more people. So with that being said, I will start sharing my screen because that gives you something to look at and I can talk to it. And also I have some images here that hopefully tantalize you a little bit. Just a little spoiler ahead of time. I am getting better at taking photos, but I have the chronic problem that when I'm working, I am immersed and I'm a little bit dirty and there's dust, and we have been quite bad at taking enough photos of our work. So bear with me. I hope it's enough. And I'm getting better at it. Yeah. So just to start off with the question, what is natural plaster? And I'm sure there is some varying opinions on this. I will just share what I see a natural plaster to be. So it's basically in its simplest form, natural materials combined to make a plaster. So in this case, what we're looking at is lime or clay as the binder, and then fine aggregates. Usually that is sand in varying particle sizes. It can also be other things like recycled glass and so forth. And then there's a wide variety of other things that can be added that would still fall into this natural material category, fibers, other additives. And we'll get to that a little bit in more detail as we go through. I am mainly focusing on lime and clay in this, so I'm not touching on gypsum, even though gypsum in some instances can also be a natural material. So just clay and lime. And when looking at plasters, as I said, we could go into so much detailed depth and follow down like different pathways of looking at plasters. So I just want to talk about, why would we even use a plaster in the first instance. I'm talking about creative options. So obviously, like the aesthetic reasons, they are very valid. Some beautiful things can be achieved with plasters, but there's actually some really practical purposes why plasters get installed. And often it has to do with improving the durability and the serviceability of the substrate. So the substrate is the thing that gets plastered. That's the substrate. So it's either a structure or it's an infill. And it's often when that is quite rough or not finished, plaster coats are applied to improve the durability, add air tightness, and make the surfaces easier to service. So like wiping and so forth, like it cuts out dust and so forth. Plasters actually also introduce some thermal mass into your building. They're often heavy. There is some lightweight plasters, but the plasters we're looking at today are heavy. So you're introducing a material that can store heat and release heat. And very, very interesting, and probably the reason, one of the number one reasons why I basically always would recommend at least introducing these types of materials into any kind of building, like as a retrofitting situation often, or if it's a conventional build, like just have some natural materials in your building, is because both earth and lime regulate indoor humidity. So that's humidity in fluctuations indoors. And plasters are a very easy way of installing lime and earth as in a retrofitting type scenario. So the plasters are probably sort of the easiest way to get these materials in and to achieve very substantial humidity regulation. So I am actually going to just show you a very simple comparison of different building materials to exemplify this statement. If you're interested in regulation of indoor humidity, I would really suggest to visit this website here, Clayworks. They are producers of magnificent earthen plasters in the UK, and they have a very extensive website that is absolute eye candy. So they have got the photos down to a T. If you want to get inspired, go and look at that. And if you're interested in the humidity control, they have a compilation of research, which is really up to date and really interesting. But for today's live, it's enough to just point out that the porous materials, the porous natural materials, have the ability to absorb moisture out of the indoor air and release it again. So they have a buffering effect on indoor humidity. Earth a little bit more than lime. And it depends with the earth, it depends a little bit on the clay type as well. So obviously we're looking at plasters that have a high sand content, and sand doesn't do that, but the clay particle and the porosity of the plaster does it. And it's very remarkable. So the plasters don't perform as well as, for example, your adobe bricks in this respect, or a cob for that matter, but they still have a really buffering effect on indoor climate. And it was interesting. I was talking to a client recently that it wasn't actually a client, it was someone that bought a building that we had plastered. So they didn't know anything about earthen plasters, and they bought it. Like there's a photo of that place a bit later on, and they said it's the driest home they've ever lived in. They would never go back to anything else, and they just absolutely love it. So real case for these plasters in any type of building, and they can be applied over a variety of substrates. So here talking about first of all the scenario where you're combining, where you have a hybrid construction, maybe a timber construction or a concrete construction or whatnot, and you introduce earthen plasters over these types of more conventional building materials. So your concrete block, your fiber cement sheets or gypsum sheets work. They have to be primed, and an adhesion coat has to be applied, but they are very easy substrates to work over. And obviously, if you're more aiming towards an entire natural building, you would have your straw bale walls or your earth walls or even some stone. And all these natural materials can be plastered with earth as well and with lime. So we're looking at mainly interior plasters today, but the lime plasters definitely also work in exterior situations. So yeah, you have a lot of options. The substrate, the only thing that you have to look at when you're plastering in terms of the substrate, it has to be solid, it has to be dust free, and you might have to have an adhesion coat or like grittiness to the surface. So like if your surface is very, very flat and kind of a bit slippery, you need to do something to give it a little bit of grip. And there is some consideration in terms of, would you choose an earth plaster or a lime plaster? And I see the slide has just shifted a little bit, but you'll be able to divide the two columns up. So looking at earth plasters to begin with, earth plasters are mainly useful in interior situations and also can be applied in very sheltered exterior situations. Because they have a high sand content, they're not durable if there is wind-driven rain or water getting to them, that would wash off. When you're working with earthen plaster, you are only working against a drying, not a curing. So you have longer working times. If you're just getting into plastering, earthen plasters are definitely simpler, more forgiving to work with, and you can sort of pick up the plastering skills more easily. Because of that, you're not working against the clock, as in with other plasters where there's a chemical cure. Also, the earthen plasters are, from an environmental point of view, very they tick all the boxes really. They have very low embodied energy. You often can use material that is dug on site. It's very nice to use, and you can work with the existing clay colors. So they're really, really beautiful. They're medium strength, so like the impact strength, they're not as strong as lime plasters, but in many applications, they're more than enough. And even though they're a little bit softer and they might chip a little bit, they're quite easy to repair. So that's something I really like. I have sometimes I need to go back and repair a surface after a few years, or if the people want to sell the house, and you can actually touch up with the same material and you don't even see it. So I find them easier to maintain than, for example, like a gypsum board with a paint. On the other hand, you have the lime plasters, and they are useful. They're very durable. They're useful in exterior situations, also in situations that receive rain. You're working against the clock because you're working with a chemical cure, and just keeping in mind that even though lime is a natural material, it is still quarried and it's processed and it's burned, so it has high embodied energy. It does require a good level of plastering skills and also skills understanding how to work with lime. And it is a material that is a little bit less forgiving and a little bit less friendly than earth. So definitely really important that you wear protective equipment, that you're wearing gloves, glasses when you're mixing, and so forth. And another thing that is very, it's particular to lime is that the lime is very white. So all the colors that you mix from that white base lean into the pastel tones. They're much more of a pastel color than your earthy tones of the earth plaster. And yeah, I say it is a strong material, and it actually gets stronger over time as it cures. So quite different materials. Sometimes they get combined. That is a little bit advanced, so I'm not really touching about lime earth mortars at all today. And just wanting to put this out there, you know, like there's some fundamental decisions that have to be made on which materials, and yeah, both are beautiful and both have awesome creative options. So we'll start with the Earthen Plasters. Here you see actually a black or nearly sort of charcoaly earthen plaster over a gypsum board, and that was achieved with a black iron oxide pigment in the mix. It has also been finished with a clay paint that was also tinted with a black iron oxide. So what is earthen plaster in a nutshell? It's basically just sieved clay, a good strong clay, sieved so that you have fine particle sizes, and then sand. And the sand really affects the overall look of the earthen plaster. So there's many different sands, like you have to aim for a nice grain distribution, preferably like a color that complements or blends in with your clay color. So we often use quite a white marble sand that works really nice, has little shiny bits in it. You can also add lots of other things. Often you will see that fibers are added, like your chopped straw or rice husks and so forth. You can experiment with crushed glass, which gives you nice reflexes. Cow manure is a traditional material that gets introduced, and it both introduces microfiber and glue. So the casein in the cow manure is a stabilizer for plasters, which can be quite useful at times. You can use other natural binders like casein, flour paste, and so forth. And then pigments. And just talking about the pigments are great because you can manipulate the color, but pigments color everything. So my personal preference is to work with the clay color. So find clays that have the colors that I'm after, because they tend to have more of a depth in hues and color, rather than working with the pigments, the oxides, which then give you a bit of a flatter color. It's just, yeah, different creative options here, really. And you can go over a variety of substrates with your earthen plaster. I already touched upon that. You can go over board materials, your fiber cement board, gypsum board. You can go over masonry. You can go over concrete block by preparing the surface. And one substrate that I actually really like, especially in more retrofitting situations, is you can use recycled carpet, Hessian side out. So I would go for a Hessian carpet, not a synthetic carpet. Doesn't matter what the fluffy bit is on the top, but you attach it and you have the backing out. And that is a really nice substrate for earthen plasters. And in actual fact, the earthen plaster seems to sort of post-tension them, like when it dries out, it all goes quite rigid and it nearly turns into something like an earth board. So something worth experimenting with as a substrate for sure. And you can, aim for your simple surfaces that are just plastered flat. They do look beautiful, in my opinion. Even though they're flat, there's still a softness to them. The colors bring that softness. The slight undulations of the trowel work. So here you see the white one on the left is over gypsum board, and it's a white kaolin clay. And the other one at the top there with the fireplace and the rock work, that's the house I mentioned just before that the people bought and they love it. So it's really nicely combined with other natural materials, your timbers and your stonework. And the one at the bottom here you see is a building that we were involved in Chile, where they also finished light earth walls with beautiful different kinds of natural earthy colors that they found locally. You can really use the earth to complement sort of deep, chunky wall systems like your straw bale. And these are both straw bale buildings that I plastered. One is our yellow clay color that we also use for our mud bricks, and the other one is a white kaolin clay. Often when the homes are architecturally designed, the clients lean towards lighter surfaces and your whites and off-whites, so you can achieve that with porcelain clay, even though that clay is not quite as strong as your darker clay. So that's an option. And moving from those more simple surfaces, just the flat surfaces, into more creative ideas, and that's what we're talking about today, the creative ideas. What is possible can be done on an entire building. It can be done on a facade. It can also be done as artwork. So sometimes I have worked with the medium of earth plaster on a board that was then hung, and I quite enjoy that. So if you're keen to get into it and just explore these options, I would suggest do that. Make a smaller sample, maybe, you know, an A2 or something, and experiment. And you don't need many tools. So often the tools that come in handy are your tools that you would use for pottery. So those scrapey tools, little spatulas, little trowels, and your Japanese trowels are very useful too. So the ones that have got flexible blades. So this one here is actually a plastic blade. There's also a stainless steel blade one that works really well, and you can apply the plaster in a more controlled and fine fashion. And here you also see what I was doing with blending two different clay colors. So the yellow is the clay that is local to us that we use for earthen plasters, for our mud bricks, and the white is a bagged kaolin clay that we get from the pottery supply shop. It's quite expensive, so we only use that for earthen plasters if we need to lighten the color, and I'm testing different ratios of mixes for those two colors here. So one of the really cool things that you can do with earth plasters is a technique called Sgraffito. And Sgraffito really sort of loosely translates to scratch back. And the way this system works is you often apply a couple of coats of plaster anyway. And with the Sgraffito, you are scratching the top coat back to expose the base coat. So you can get really, really artistic and technical with this by applying multiple coats, not just two, so 3-4 coats of plaster on top of each other. You can introduce different colors in different coats, and you can imagine as you're scratching back that you're starting to expose the colors of the layers below. So I have actually worked without color. I have just worked with the scratching back. And this one, you see the size with me standing next to the tree of life here, was quite an intricate and small one, which was quite hard to do. The other one is the stingray is actually as big as an entire wall, and that was easier to do. And the way I have achieved this bigger design is with projection. So I projected the design onto the fresh plaster, and then I started scratching back. It's a little bit of a crossover from my activist times, drawing banners, where you also project and then paint, the slogans or whatever on the banners. So that works really well for Sgraffito as well. You could also transfer the design onto your plaster and then start scratching, but the fresh plaster is quite sensitive, so I prefer the projection. You can definitely go wild with your clay colors. So here a couple of things that we have in our place. So the big feature wall, which is 2 stories high, is all earthen plaster. It's over 2 different substrates, so you don't see the difference. The bottom actually is over mud brick because the bottom of our building is load-bearing mud brick, and then the top is a timber framed structure for the first floor, and the earthen plaster goes through, so you don't see the change in substrate materials. And I have worked with different colored clays here. So the red and the light gray and the white, they are the clay colors, the way they're dug. And then the bluey black stripe is achieved with black oxide. So very different quality to that plaster. The color is flatter. It reflects light differently, but obviously we could achieve these really dark colors, which are not very common to find in clay out of the ground. Even that red actually is very special. It comes from Golden Bay, so it's an iron oxide that is in the soil there. So very lucky to find that clay in big enough quantities to do this. Be very lucky. It was a special find. And the photo at the bottom is just a simple earthen plaster, actually over a recycled carpet backing. And this is now sleep out. So the back wall is carpeted and insulated, and the other walls are filled with light earth infill, and everything is plastered with a whitish clay plaster. And then I painted the moon with some of the clay colors I found. So the combination of clay paint and clay plaster, obviously it sort of just crosses over and works really well together. I love it. You can also, when you're working wet, you can do a thing called embossing. And this is not as easy as it might sound, because pushing into the earthen plaster, it's quite gritty. So you can't emboss really intricate designs because it doesn't displace the sand. But what we did here is we made these embossing tools that had basic shapes, and they were basic Islamic shapes. We originally developed them for a Kuwaiti restaurant design, so Della Restaurant, and I analyzed the Islamic shapes. They break down into these quite simple shapes that then can get combined into very intricate designs. And it is a beautiful thing to explore the geometry and how the things fit together. And then you can emboss these simple designs into your wet plaster and just let it dry, and that works really well. So here we embossed these simple 6-sided, they were like long honeycombs, and that formed the floral cross pattern here. And then we painted some of it with gold for the Kuwaiti restaurant, and carried on with the same shapes but put together in a different way, just a little band at the top of a building, of a wall. And other options would be, like, instead of pushing in or scratching out, instead of having a negative detail, you have a positive detail. So that would be your relief work, where you attach clay to the surface of the clay surface and get it to stick out. And that goes quite well together with your inlay. So here you see I've applied the floral, the viney type design to the surface, and then I've inlaid the flowers with mother of pearl with PowerShell. And another way of having something stick out is your stenciling. And for that you would need a stencil. I have used again an overhead projector foil that I cut with a hot tool, and then I brushed a thicker, very fine, like would qualify as a thick clay paint or a very fine clay plaster, and I just brushed that over the stencil to get the ginkgo leaves. And bringing all these things together, you can combine all of this, and this is what we have done on some of the community projects we did. We did this one for a school, so a big earth mural. It's I think 2 meters by 5 meters, and the substrate we used were old doors that we got from the recycling center that we primed, plastered, and then we applied the top coat with our different colors. The earth plaster here had been colored with some pigments, some natural pigments, some synthetic pigments to get the blues. We added glass for different textures. We scratched back. We applied clay paint in some places. And you see like the design is a design of Golden Bay. You see the little whales swimming in the bay and the rain coming in and the sun shining. So beautiful design by Bella Walker. And we executed it with parents and children. So it was really wonderful project. A technique that I actually learned from a woman called Consuelo Miranda from Chile, who visited in 2016, and she attended the International Strawberry Conference, Natural Building Conference that we organized here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And you see here that there is a bit of a cultural crossover going on between indigenous designs from our lands, Tangata Whenua, and her lands, so which are more Inca inspired. And again, similar techniques to the mural before, applied different colored earthen plasters and then scratched back to get the details and to expose colors below, and all of that works together in the design. So there's just a few options here for your earth. And moving into lime plasters, it's quite a different universe with the lime plasters, because the lime sets chemically. So there is more to understand with lime technology, and it's more technical. So I will not go into the technicalities of lime in this presentation. Both earth plasters and lime plasters are something we extensively cover in our 3-month program. So there's lots to learn there, lots of detailing, lots of tricks of the trade. For lime plasters, it definitely pays to do your research, and as I said, make sure that you wear protective equipment if you're using it. But I really want to include it because there's such amazing art forms that come from lime, and lime is such an old building material. It's actually, as a building material, it is older than earth. It's super ancient, and there is very well preserved ancient art that is done with lime. So lime sculptures, lime paintings, and it just shows how durable this material really is. So in a nutshell, when we're talking of lime plasters, we're talking of lime putty, lime binder, which is burnt and slaked lime. There's different types, so I'm not going to go into the details of that. But it's lime putty, and then sands. And the sands can be different types of stones in sand form. So it can be just your silica sand, it can be a limestone sand that's mixed in. You also, like with the earthen plasters, you can add fibers, often in some of the base coats or top coats. Historically, you have your animal hair. you can combine it with a cow manure as well. There is combination with soap, with seaweeds, with tallow. So lots of different traditional recipes with lime. And the different additives like the soap, seaweed, tallow give you slightly different results. So very interesting stuff to experiment with. And obviously you can also add your pigments, but as I said, it's a very white base, so you'll always end up with kind of a pastely tone. And yes, like there is definitely the darker shades, but that's tints. And I have not got personal experience with tints. I want to try them, but I'm a little bit reluctant because some of them are not very natural. So typically for us, we would be using lime for exterior plasters. As I said, lime, even though it is a natural building material, it is quarried, it is heavily processed, it is high embodied energy. It's a beautiful material, but I personally prefer just using it sparingly and in the applications where it's really shining. So the weather protective function of the lime plaster is a real draw card for me. I personally don't like using it as a binder, for example, for light infills like, for example, hempcrete. Or so I know that it is exciting on one hand to have the hempcrete, and on the other hand, I really wish that the binder clay would be used more in combination with hemp shiv. So really wanting to put it out there, to keep in mind that lime is high embodied energy. And here you see these are two buildings that we have supplied mud bricks for and built, and they were both finished with lime plaster. The top one had a lime wash on it, and the lime plaster was tinted in itself, so it's a little bit more mottled. The bottom one was finished with a silicate paint, a water glass paint, which in combination with the lime surface reacts and turns everything to stone, so a very durable finish. I couldn't resist putting in a photo of my old home country, Switzerland. So leads us into very creative ways of working with lime plaster. So this is Sgraffito in lime, again, similar to the earth, but when you scratch back the lime, you can work with thinner coats. And here you see a traditional design up in the mountains in the Engadine, where this is a tradition. So it is a tradition to apply several coats of lime plaster and then scratch back and put in the designs that then mimic cornerstones or windowsills, or there's whole scenes that are scratched into the facade, and many beautiful things to look at, many details. Sometimes this building here is quite simple. There's buildings that are totally covered in Sgraffito designs. So yeah, the original beautiful tagging. You can also find many old historic buildings that have got fresco technique in them. So it's often in churches. So you see the Sixtine Chapel here. Michelangelo was one of the techniques he used. And basically what fresco is about is painting with pigments onto fresh lime plaster. And as the lime plaster cures, the pigments get locked into the surface, and in a very, very durable way of painting. The one here you see with the little cat door is a fresco, like one of my first attempts at fresco. So it's like slightly more childlike, but very, very, very beautiful technique. I really enjoyed myself because you just mix the different pigments with water, and you can adjust the tone by watering it down more or less. So for example, the green here, that was just one type of green and blue that I had, and the light green was just more water. And yeah, it came out really nice, and it was a lot of fun. So definitely something that you could do on small scale and have fun with. In terms of the lime plaster and creativity, I'm just going to touch on one of the traditional techniques that is very creative, the Tadelakt. There's lots of different ones. So that you've got your Venetian plaster and you've got your Japanese plasters, but I'm just going to talk about the Tadelakt because it's the one that I have personal experience with, and at the moment I'm quite active with Tadelakt and teaching people the Tadelakt because it is very fun and you can achieve very nice surfaces. You can make little objects, you can plaster surfaces, window sills, bench, window benches. You can plaster your shower if you want, and it is very very sensuous, a very sensuous surface. So here you see the Tadelakt objects, and I have put in the clay ball so that you see what the substrate was. So all of these objects here were originally made out of clay, and then they are covered with the Tadelakt. And the way the Tadelakt works is that you have a fine lime plaster that goes over an absorbent surface, and it gets worked in a certain technique. Needs to, it's a little bit, you need to learn how to do it, but it gets applied in several coats, and the coats get compacted and then worked with a stone. Traditionally it's a stone. The stone has to be harder than limestone so that you don't scratch the stone, and the stone helps to gradually compact the surface, and then you apply a natural soap, and the natural soap reacts with the lime, creates a lime stearate, and you end up with a very water repellent finish. So just showing here some of the practice pieces we did. So the bowls here at the bottom you see are clay bowls covered with Tadelakt. That was just done on a hands-on workshop. In the background you see equivalent colors but done in earth plaster. And the top two images show how the shine comes. So when you're polishing the Tadelakt, all of a sudden at a certain point that lime stearate, the soap, starts buffing up. So you're basically working with the stuff that is problematic in a shower, the soap scum, when you have your limey water and your soap. But in this instant, it actually works in your favor and it starts shining, and it is absolutely gorgeous to touch. And I'm just going to share this website as well. So if you want to have Tadelakt inspiration, Budwell Creations are absolutely amazing craftspeople, and again, very beautiful images, nice projects, amazing projects. So well worth checking out just for inspiration. And again, yeah, they have got the photography down way more than I do. So go and have a look at them to be inspired. Very nice. And they have been doing Tadelakt for decades. So master crafts people. What the ultimate use for the Tadelakt is in wet areas. So you can definitely just do Tadelakt for because you like the surface, but they actually are very useful in wet areas. And here you see a shower that we were involved in. It was one of our students on one of the workshops, and he then went and made his shower. So he decided to combine it with tiles on the floor, which is useful, and he applied the Tadelakt on one of the walls in the shower. And here you see how the water pearls off that surface once it's been soaped and polished. And the way you actually care for the surface is also with natural soap. So all the stuff that would be problematic on a shower made out of glass is great in your Tadelakt shower. And just putting out there that we do have a Tadelakt class. It's available on our website, and we're only doing the intake every so often, because even though it's an online pre-recorded class, we offer regular get-togethers on Zoom where we do the practice pieces. So we've just done one of those, and it's so much fun. I am I'm getting a little bit addicted to the Tadelakt. And yeah, progressing. It's sort of a progression. You start with little smaller things, and you go into hand basins or art, and then eventually to your shower or even bathtub. So I hope this has been inspiring. I hope it has given you some ideas, and I'm wondering if there are some questions. Just pop them in now. I'll have a little look and check if anyone's asked. Thank you, Claudia, for the kind words. Yeah, it is really, it's such a joy to do. It's a real joy to do. So I hope you're feeling inspired, and it has given you ideas, especially in the context of retrofitting, but also if you're, looking at building an entire natural building, to bring in a little bit, creative little things here and there. Because when I was looking at the photos, there's definite beauty in just the flat surfaces, but I wish our clients were a little bit more daring, and they would let us do more art, or they would do the art themselves. Thank you so much for watching, and yeah, if you're part of the Earth Building School Facebook group, I look forward to seeing you in there. It's been growing over the past few weeks, and yeah, I am really happy to support you on your natural building journey. All the best. So I'm just seeing there's one question coming in. Can you use lime over earthen plaster on exterior? Good, really good question. So this is moving into technical use of lime, and I want to balance this answer. So I would not use it over earthen plaster. I would use it over an earthen surface, but I would not put an earthen plaster in between. And the reason for that is that, it depends on the situation, but the earthen plaster is not very strong. It is quite sandy. And if you manage to have an earthen plaster that is thick, that is very textured, that has a lot of fiber in it, sure. But if you just apply a sandy clay mix and then apply a lime plaster, you might have the situation where it delaminates. And it is the reason why I'm cautious about answering it just off the cuff like this is it's a little bit of a bigger discussion, and there's quite heated and strong opinions about it from different plasters. So I'm a little bit more on the cautious side, especially because here in our Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have wind-driven rain. So our exterior plasters have to be very, very, very durable. And lime plasters, even though they're water resistant, they are not completely waterproof. So if you have the situation where water, like the surface doesn't erode at all, water still travels through your lime plaster in a long weather event. If there's any moisture that touches your earthen plaster, the earthen plaster having clay as the binder will start swelling. So it might be good, it might be fine for a few years, but if you have the swelling and drying out, and if that happens over a longer period of time, you might get delamination. So it needs to be done with care. Like lime over earth has to be done with care anyway, but I would not go with a lime plaster over an earthen plaster that has, especially if it has a lot of sand in it and not much straw. Yeah. So exterior plastering is a whole thing. It could be a whole, it could be a whole course in itself, but I hope that sort of is a balanced answer. And if you have more questions, Mark, pop over and ask in the group, and we can discuss it. It's an important question, and one that we get a lot. Yes, especially over straw bale buildings. So you will be applying your body coat, which will be out of clay for sure, could also be out of lime. But if you want to conserve lime use, you would be it's like a cobby, very strawy kind of mix that you're applying over your straw bale. But on top of that, you will have to texture it, and on top of that, you will have to really apply enough thickness of lime plaster so that you don't have that water ingression. And I would also really, really recommend that you apply a silicate paint over your lime plaster. And I'm going to link you like a data sheet of the silicate paint, because that shows you that a traditional lime plaster finished with a lime wash, you know, how water travels through that as compared to a silicate paint, which is totally breathable and is used historically as well, which really lets it breathe but cuts down that water ingression. So especially over straw, you really want to make sure that you don't get a failure, because otherwise you'll have a rot problem. You're welcome. So I popped that information into the comment section because it is interesting. And I also link to Clayworks and Budwork Creations because that's fun. Yeah, and I think that will complete it for today. And as I said, if you have more questions coming up, I'm here, and I'm really enjoying the interaction. It gives me, yeah, inspiration and oomph to carry on. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye.